The courtroom was cold that morning, not from the air conditioning, but from the weight of judgment hanging thick in the air. The woman standing before the bench looked tired, her brown eyes weary yet steady, her clothes simple but neat. Her name was Amara Daniels, a single mother and schoolteacher who had spent her life helping children dream beyond their circumstances. But today, she was the one on trial, accused of theft, betrayed by those she once trusted. "Miss Daniels," the judge's voice thundered, "you stand accused of embezzling $5,000 from Havenwood Elementary's charity fund. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," she said softly, her voice trembling but clear. The judge, Harold Preston, leaned back in his chair with a smirk that carried years of unchecked authority. His gavel rested beside his hand like a weapon. "Not guilty," he repeated, mocking the words. "Everyone who sits in that chair says the same thing." The courtroom chuckled. Lawyers exchanged knowing glances. The prosecutor, a young man in a slick navy suit, adjusted his tie and smiled faintly, as if the outcome was already written. Amara clutched her file tightly. Inside were neatly arranged pages, proof, statements, timelines. But no one seemed to care. The narrative had already been decided. Poor woman, desperate for money, caught stealing. Case closed. The judge's tone grew colder. "You're representing yourself, Miss Daniels?" "Yes, Your Honor." He raised a brow. "Do you even have a law degree?" A pause. Then, calmly, she said, "I have enough knowledge to defend the truth." The words hung in the air, quiet, unshaken. The prosecutor began his case, his tone dripping with confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is clear. This woman withdrew funds from the school's charity account. Her fingerprints were found on the envelope. The principal himself, an upstanding man, confirmed she was the last to handle the documents." Amara looked down as whispers filled the courtroom. She'd been humiliated, suspended from work, shamed in front of colleagues. The same parents she once comforted at PTA meetings now crossed the street to avoid her. When it was her turn to speak, she rose slowly, gathering her notes. "Your Honor," she began, "I'd like to call Principal Howard to the stand." The principal strutted forward, smug and composed, adjusting his tie like a man attending his own victory ceremony. "Mr. Howard," Amara said, "how long have you worked at Havenwood?" 22 years, he replied proudly. "And in those 22 years, how many teachers have accused you of bias?" The courtroom stirred. The prosecutor objected. The judge sustained it immediately. "Stick to the theft, Miss Daniels," Judge Preston warned, tapping his gavel. "This isn't a gossip column." "Yes, Your Honor," she said softly, then turned back to Howard. "You testified that I was the last person to handle the documents. Are you certain?" "Yes." "And where were the documents stored?" "In your desk drawer." "My drawer?" "Yes, the one in your classroom." She smiled faintly. "The drawer that every teacher shares when we rotate classrooms due to repairs?" He hesitated. The crowd murmured. Her tone sharpened. "Mr. Howard, do you recall approving maintenance work in my classroom the same day the envelope went missing?" He swallowed. I might have?" Amara took a deep breath. "And did you know your administrative password was used to access the account that same evening?" The principal's eyes flickered. "That's ridiculous. Are you accusing me?" "I'm accusing no one," she said, her voice calm. "I'm simply pointing to facts." Judge Preston frowned, his impatience simmering. "Miss Daniels, you're wasting the court's time with speculation." She turned toward him slowly, her voice steady. "Then let me present evidence." From her folder, she produced a series of printed emails and transaction records. These are copies of withdrawals made under the principal's credentials, along with timestamps from the school's security system. The prosecutor snatched the papers, scanning them quickly. His face tightened. "And how did you acquire these documents?" the judge asked suspiciously. "I requested them through a non-profit organization," she said. "What organization?" "The Educators' Legal Defense Network." The courtroom grew silent. The judge leaned forward. "Never heard of it." "You wouldn't have," Amara replied. "It's small, but growing. It exists to protect teachers who are wrongly accused or mistreated by those in power. And who runs this organization? She met his eyes, calm and unwavering. I do. The words rippled through the courtroom like thunder. The judge blinked, startled. The prosecutor shifted uneasily. Even the spectators straightened in their seats. But before he could speak, the back door opened. A young man in a gray suit entered quietly, his expression tense. He moved toward the defense table and whispered something to the prosecutor. The judge frowned. Who is that? The prosecutor hesitated. Your Honor, that's Evan Preston, our financial consultant. The judge froze. Evan? Amara's gaze flicked toward the young man. Your son, I believe? The judge's gavel hit the desk hard. Order in the court. But Amara continued, her tone cutting through the chaos. Your Honor, this man, the one handling the school's financial audits, authorized several wire transfers under a hidden sub-account linked to the charity fund. Would you like to see the signatures? Evan's face drained of color. The documents in Amara's hand trembled only slightly as she handed them to the clerk. The signature matched perfectly. His. The courtroom gasped. The judge's hand shook as he looked down at the papers. His breath hitched. Evan, what is this? His son stammered. Dad, I can explain. Explain what? Amara interjected, her voice firm now, no longer trembling. How a woman you've never met was dragged through the mud because your son used her credentials to hide his own fraud? The judge looked shattered, torn between rage and disbelief. Miss Daniels, if this is true, it is true, she said, stepping closer. And you mocked me for defending myself. You called me a liar. You let your bias blind you, not to justice, but to the truth standing right in front of you. The silence was deafening. Evan's eyes glistened. The principal buried his face in his hands. The judge leaned back, staring at the woman he'd dismissed just an hour ago, as if seeing her for the first time. Finally, he spoke, his voice trembling. Miss Daniels, I owe you an apology. But Amara simply gathered her files and turned toward the exit. Don't apologize to me, Your Honor. Apologize to every person who stood in this courtroom and was silenced because they didn't look the way you expected justice to look. She walked out, the sound of her heels echoing against the marble floor, each step a quiet declaration of victory. Outside, the air was cool. The city seemed quieter than usual. She looked up at the gray clouds above, whispering a soft prayer for peace. But she knew peace wouldn't come easily. Not when the system she faced was still broken. Not when the son of a judge could forge records and nearly destroy a woman's life. Back inside, Judge Preston sat frozen at his bench, the documents still in his trembling hands. His eyes flickered between the door Amara had just walked through and his son now surrounded by officers. He whispered to himself, "What have I done?" The clerk approached cautiously. "Your Honor, should I proceed with the arrest?" The judge didn't answer. His gaze lingered on the door, where the faintest trace of Amara's voice seemed to echo, words she'd spoken earlier that morning. Integrity doesn't beg to be seen, she had said. It reveals itself when truth demands it. The gavel struck once, then twice. But the sound felt hollow, meaningless, like a confession too late to matter. As the officers led Evan away, the judge's phone buzzed quietly beside him. An unknown number, a single message. This is only the beginning. ELDN. The judge's hand trembled as he read the initials again. Educators Legal Defense Network. The same organization his son had tried to silence. The same one he had mocked. And the same woman he had just underestimated. He stared at the message for a long time before looking up toward the courtroom door, his face pale. Because deep down, he knew what that message meant. Amara wasn't done. The message on Judge Preston's phone sat like a stone under his thumb. This is only the beginning. ELDN. He stared until the letters blurred. He'd thought everything ended when Amara Daniels walked out of his courtroom, quiet, steady, unshaken. But the ping told him her story had just begun. The woman he'd mocked had turned her pain into power. Outside, cameras flashed and reporters swarmed. Amara moved through them like calm water, her shoulders back, her eyes fixed ahead. The educator's legal defense network, the small group she'd built in a church basement, had exploded overnight into a force the district couldn't ignore. Witnesses emerged. Paper trails surfaced. Fear began to fade. Back in chambers, Preston opened a thick packet labeled Evidence A. The numbers hit like hammer blows. Login records, bank transfers, forged authorizations, all traced to one computer, Evan Preston's. His son's signature repeated line after line, linking school improvement funds to private accounts. The judge's stomach turned. He'd spent decades worshiping the law as an unshakable mountain, but now he saw the cracks inside it. Cracks he'd helped carve. He made the only decent call left. Recuse himself and request an independent audit. Pride had no place in justice. The district attorney moved fast. Grand juries rarely sleep on evidence that loud. Evan Preston was indicted for embezzlement and obstruction. Principal Howard, who had testified with righteous certainty, found investigators combing through his own records. Emails revealed complicity, cover-ups, backdated approvals, silence bought with small favors. Amara didn't gloat. She wanted truth, not spectacle. Each new hearing reopened wounds. The teachers laid off, the students robbed of programs, the community humiliated. Yet amid the pain, something sturdy began to grow. Fundraisers restarted, budgets were rebuilt, and parents who once whispered her name now spoke it with pride. The press called her the people's teacher. A local anchor asked on live TV what she'd learned through it all. Amara answered softly, "Systems fail when rank becomes a shield. We don't need saints in charge. We need accountability." When Evan appeared in court, he looked nothing like the smug man who'd laughed at her suspension meeting months before. His wrists trembled as the bailiff read the charges. The jurors, parents, retirees, janitors, watched him with quiet fury. For once, power sat on the other side of the bench. Witnesses came forward, clerks, secretaries, teachers who had swallowed fear for years. Their testimonies formed a mosaic of deceit. Principal Howard broke under questioning and resigned mid-trial. His letter cited personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. Amara's courage had ripped open what decades of politics had buried. Then, Judge Preston took the stand, not as a judge, but as a father forced to face himself. He spoke of the warnings he ignored, the arrogance he mistook for discipline, the privilege that made him blind. His voice wavered when he said, "I mocked her case because I assumed guilt comes dressed in poverty. I was wrong." The room stayed silent. Even Amara felt the weight of compassion press through her anger. She hadn't wanted his ruin. She'd wanted change. Verdict day came under gray skies. Evan Preston was found guilty on all counts. The sentence was firm, the apology empty. For the community, justice tasted bittersweet. For Amara, it was necessary, surgical, not spiteful. Months later, offers poured in. Interviews, foundations, book deals. She refused them all. Movements don't need idols, she told her friend. They need infrastructure. She poured every donation into the educator's legal defense network. Staff, a hotline, training seminars. Teachers learned how to document abuse of power, how to speak and be heard. The district rebuilt too. New ethics protocols, public ledgers, dual signature fund approvals. The PTA gained oversight authority. None of it erased the nights Amara slept on a friend's couch, but each reform was proof that pain could become blueprint. Judge Preston never returned to the bench. His resignation letter read like confession and farewell. He spent his final years lecturing on humility at law schools, warning students that authority without empathy breeds injustice. One spring afternoon, Amara met him again in a quiet municipal hall. No robes, no microphones, just two people marked by the same case. "Thank you," he said. "You saved more than you know." Amara nodded. "We saved each other," she replied. There were no cameras, only the stillness of mutual respect where once there had been judgment. For a while, peace seemed real. Then one morning, an unmarked envelope landed on Amara's desk. Inside, a single sheet. "You exposed one pocket. There are others." The watermark belonged to a private audit firm tied to multiple school boards. She recognized it instantly. Trouble never truly ends. It just changes address. Her phone buzzed. Anonymous tips, new evidence, frightened voices asking for help. She exhaled slowly, feeling that old fire rekindle. Justice had given her a stage, but purpose kept her there. She called her team together. "We meet at 9. Bring every file no matter how small. This isn't over." As dusk painted the skyline, Amara looked out across the city, its lights flickering like promises waiting to be kept. She thought of every teacher who'd been silenced, every child who'd lost faith in fairness, every judge who might yet learn that truth doesn't wear a suit. She turned back to her desk, slid the new letter into a folder labeled Next Case, and smiled. Not in triumph, but resolve. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in the distance. The city moved on. So did she. If you believe in truth and fairness, in giving power back to the people who shape our children's future, subscribe, share, and stand with voices like Amara's. Justice isn't a solo, it's a chorus. Add yours.